Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the Aces of Ventures and the community for joining us today. Many people don't know about the project, so I will be presenting it in a very concise and brief way. The Aces of Ventures, it's our community, it's our project, it's our global decentralized entrepreneurship accelerator. When my co-founder Robert came to me and said, Andre, we don't want to miss the Web3 wave, we need to jump on it. So let's come up with a project that is into NFT. And we came up with many ideas. Then, you know, I'm a business owner, he's a serial entrepreneur. And we thought, if you want to succeed, you need to do something that you excel in, you have experience in. And that's how we thought, why not launch a global decentralized entrepreneurship accelerator? Based on my experience, I've been training for the past 14 years in 53 countries about entrepreneurship and being an advisor of business owners. And that's how I met Robert, who's a serial entrepreneur with 6 companies in his portfolio. And when we thought about entrepreneurship, you know, the words we use in entrepreneurship, it's you take risk, you go all in, you know how to play your cards, when to burn your cards. And that's how we came up with the NFT visuals, the artwork. It's playing cards. And we called it aces because the ace in the card is usually the highest number in most of the games and the most powerful card. And whenever someone wins or excels in something, they say that's an ace. So the Aces of Ventures. And how we're linking it and giving utility to the NFT artwork, we said every person who holds a jack will be able to submit their pitch to the community. And the queen and the king every week will choose 5 jacks to pitch in front of the community. And the queen, by the way, just to show our mission to empower women, the queen is the only one who can ask questions during the pitch. In addition, when the pitches are online, the community, all the numbers, will be able to vote for the number 1 winner who's an ace, and I'll tell you what they win later on. So the co-founders are me and Robert. I told you about us, but we have an amazing team, a great, ambitious, and committed, and very deeply involved people in our community. Some of them are here. I saw Jamal writing hello in the chat, one of our moderators and team members. They are supporting us in all this project from all levels of tasks and roles. Our mission is to distribute actually $1 million to 100 entrepreneurs. And the idea stage entrepreneurs, when they pitch, we will give them $5,000. The prototype stage, they will get $10,000, and the growth stage, they will get $40,000. And to keep this accelerator valuable and the project valuable, we are bringing 100 speakers from 50 countries. And today we have Hein with us, a very dear friend, my wise friend. I was telling him before we start, there's a Chinese proverb. It says, a single conversation with a wise man is worth 10 years of studying. And believe me, whenever I meet with Hein, and we met in many international events, you cannot leave the conversation without insights and your brain thinking about many ideas and learning a lot from this wise person. Thank you for joining us today, Hein.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. And during the roadmap of our NFT project, we have the burning pit when we challenge the community to destroy their NFT card in order to get a perk or a deal or an offer or a gift. For example, an iPhone, a travel ticket, or maybe any gift from our sponsors. Also for card holding, our sponsors will give you some giveaways if you hold your card for a certain period. And one of my best milestones is when you start fusing your cards and merging 2 NFT cards to get more benefits. One of the benefits is accessing 1,300 airport lounges worldwide and generating tokens also from the tokens that we will be launching during our roadmap. Of course, we are always looking for partnerships, sponsors, and partners who will give perks and value to our community, One of our early sponsors was Live Forex Exchange. They gave us 30 vouchers of $30 to our community, and we are having many more offers to our community. I will not take more time because the screen and the time is for my friend Hein. You already watched his, saw actually his profile and read his LinkedIn profile. I will give you the screen, my friend. We are all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so probably the same with you. If I share my screen, I will stop seeing you. That's not a big problem, but therefore I will talk a bit. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm Hein Hulfsema. Let me share my screen. But before that, I'm a professor for entrepreneurship in Utrecht University, which is the biggest university in the Netherlands, one of the, say, top 100 universities, where I teach entrepreneurship and also international business. But next to that, and that is also how we know, I think, is that I'm part of the Unknown Group, which is basically a venture capital firm in the Netherlands. And I do also a lot of, let's say, the public relations for the firm, and the Global Entrepreneurship Network, of which we are both members, is also part of, let's say, the holding of Unknown Group. So before, let me share my screen, and I share my sound as well, because it is dangerous, I think. But I will also have a few videos included. Let's see. Please interrupt me if this doesn't work. But swap displays. So can you see this well?
Yes.
Yes.
Clear.
Okay. So this is me. And I would like to first start with our main product, as we have the group, how that growth, and that's a bit of a video.
Get in the Ring connects startups to opportunities to start, grow, and scale up their business.
The reason I said yes to this one was because we were coming to the home of Philips and going to spend the day with the Philips executives.
All these entrepreneurs that have great energy, they have great tools, and they all want to change the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Get in the Ring.
Oh, so yeah, so this is Get in the Ring. Now this you can see this as some kind of a promotion, international competition, 100 countries. Of course, we're building it up after Corona, but it's actually not the reason why I show it, because my topic will be about funding startups, startup scale-ups, and I mean a bit like ambitious startups and scale-ups. And what I try to argue here is how, with products like Get in the Ring, we also have our own business model in how you fund startups. But I'll come to that business model. But for that, you have to understand, I think, one of the key things of funding startups and scale-ups. And yeah, although I was introduced as a wise man, maybe it is wise actually to listen to probably the most brilliant entrepreneur, Jack Ma. And he touches upon two things. This is a speech at the World Economic Forum, I think 3 years ago, where he has actually two topics. The first one may not be that interesting. It's about what you do at different ages, but it has an important message for entrepreneurs. The second part, and I will shout, okay, start listening now very carefully, is really about the crucial component of funding startups.
When you are 20 to 30 years old, you should follow a good boss, join a good company to learn how to do things properly. When you're 30 to 40 years old, if you want to do something yourself, just do it. You still can't afford to lose, to fail. But when you're 40 to 50 years old, my suggestion is that you should do things that you are good at, right? And not do things that, oh, that's very interesting, I want to try something new. It's a bit dangerous more. When you're 50 to 60 years old, spending time training and developing young people, the next generation. When you're over 60 years old, better stay with your grandchildren. So 30 years old, we people next to 30 years are the luckiest period.
Start listening now.
A lot of things are happening, and with our knowledge, with our physical power, it's time. I was born in a very poor family. I never got a great education. I failed all the examinations. For what reason? I don't know. Later, I realized I don't have money, I don't have technology. The only thing I competed with my people, the young people, is let's compete for 10 years later. This is what I believe 10 years later will be happening. So everything I do for that goal, I know 10 years later, this thing is going to happen. So prepare for that. Because I know if I compete with him for next month, no chance. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. And it's the opportunity for people like us. The most difficult thing is to convincing a successful people. When you tell him, this is a great opportunity, he says, no, forget it, right? I've been doing this for 30 years. But for people like us, we're looking for opportunities in order to survive. If you want to be successful tomorrow, it's impossible. If you want to be successful a year later, it's impossible. But if you want to win 10 years later, you have a chance. When you are 20 to 30 years old,
imagine this better.
Amazing.
When you are
No,
20 to 30 years old.
Okay, so what is he saying? What he is saying is, if you are judging business models, business plans, and startups, look, any business plan that makes a profit that you present to a bank, angel investors, any plan that creates a profit is ridiculous. So keep that in mind. Because it is ridiculous if you think about what Jack Ma is saying. I only compete for 10 years from now. So for 10 years, I'm going to make a loss. And the important thing and the difficult thing also in funding startups is that if you present that you're going to earn something, you will not get funding because you're simply not ambitious enough. So if you want to attract venture capital, angel investments, then probably the business models behind that is that one of the 10 investments should make a profit, but then it should make a big profit because there are many startups that will be failing. So the thing is that if you present business models, business plans for funding, you're actually trying to convince people to fund a loss-making exercise for a long time. And if you don't, then then you're simply not ambitious enough. So keep that in mind, is that if you fund your startup, let's say this slide, you're looking at, for ambitions, you look at loss-making positions for 3 to 4 years, at least, I would say. Of course, if you are Tesla, you are looking at 10 years. I think, not sure whether Facebook actually makes a profit already after 20 years. So I'm not saying that we all need to be Facebooks, but the key element of entrepreneurial finance is funding a startup for the long run. So this is a bit like a perspective of what we're doing and this kind of business. So now let me look a bit like on the slide to the sources for startups and scale-ups, how you can approach funding. I think a lot of things you will recognize, of course, in this slide. But what I will do is I will talk a bit like black and white on what are the challenges of how do you in practice, and maybe also how do you approach funding for startups. And basically, and I don't mean this rude, if you want to fund a startup and you know you're not going to make a profit for the foreseeable future, you have to steal the money from other people. So you have to trick them in it. And this is a bit harsh, but it's very difficult to convince people. So you have to have a good story towards all these components of funding. And let me start talking a bit about on the left. So here, let's say your options for finding funding. So the first one is what you probably all know is the terminology is family, friends, and fools. So this is how you often start. And I think that there are two things at the really starting point of startups for funding is if I come across a startup, even for funding purposes, that is young, and they ask too early for funding, I'm starting to doubt whether they are really up to it. Because if you start already, when you begin as an entrepreneur, worry about funding your startup, maybe you don't have a lot of experience, because in the beginning, let's say first or 2 years, you don't actually need money for a startup. Now you have to do a lot of market research, you have to talk to people, you have to make a bit of a prototype. Why would it matter so much for you to have money? Or why would you stop setting up your company because you're already worrying about whether you will have the money? So I think that people who have not started, but before they already start talking about the question, how do you fund it? These are not the right entrepreneurs, I think. So you have to be careful talking too early about, whoa, will I have the funding? Because it's a negative sign. You may be right, of course, you may need the money, but a lot of experienced entrepreneurs will like, well, you can do a lot of things without money first. So why don't you do that first? So be careful in starting too early about talking about funding. Well, now, if you think about the family, friends, and fools, then it is a tip can also be is that you should avoid asking for direct money as much as possible often. So think about family, you can ask for a loan, but you can also ask to borrow somebody's car or find an uncle who has, let's say, office space. So the more you try to find funding that is not directly people giving you money, the easier it sometimes is for people to actually help you. It may not be that easy in a sense, but keep in mind that if you are funding on a shoestring, it may help if you're from your mindset is what can I get in, let's say, non-financial things, which will still help me fund my startup. With family, what you can also, of course, talk to your often if you're an entrepreneur, your parents are worried about you. Why are you not a doctor, or why are you not having a proper job, and you went to university, and why are you doing this? So they're probably, if they're worried for you for quite some time, if you prepare well, then they might think, okay, really, finally he has his passion and things like that. So try to invest, also making this kind of a pitch to your parents first and start working on it, and to your family, and not immediately ask for all kinds of things, but show your passion first. I think that these are tips. Now, who are fools? Well, there are many fools around. And one of the biggest fools, I'm from university, are universities or NGOs or whatever. So how does this work in practice? Well, for example, probably also in your area, there are a lot of, let's say, publicly funded NGO projects on entrepreneurship. And how does this work? Well, simply they win a tender for public funding to set up some kind of a public incubator, and then they commit to having 30 startups in the coming 2 years. So often these public incubators or these NGOs, they have all a big mouth like, oh, you're going to test your business model, etc. But if you just do this and don't matter, then they'll give you the money anyway, because at the end of the day, What matters for them is that they can show, well, I have in my portfolio 20 startups. And so I'm also still chairing the Centers for Entrepreneurship of the Combined University. And when I started some time ago, we had a bit of a survey of, we had 8 incubators at the universities and which startups were in each incubator. And there were 4 startups who were in more than 2 incubators, actually. So they were shopping around. And so they didn't restrict themselves to 1 incubator. They simply went to 3 and got all the funding from all the 3. And there was no interest among these public incubators to really check who were there. So the biggest fools are, let's say, these publicly funded programs. And it's often easy to attract space, coaching, networks, but also simply directly seed money from them because they have a big incentive to do so. Again, I'm here quite blunt, maybe too blunt, and etc. But it's just to get you thinking a bit creatively about how that would work. Now, the second source of funding is angels, and I call them angels and other unemployed people. Angel investors are probably the most dangerous people for startups, and let me explain why. So there are 2 reasons why you have to be really careful with angel funding too easy. So first of all, let's say that you are, so the first is a bit of a technical financial reason. So think of it this way. So you, at a certain moment, if you have a good idea and your startup starts to grow, you need to really scale the startup. So angels come in if you're really small, you have an idea, you want to make an MVP and things like that. But there comes a moment when you really need big money, maybe even from a venture capital fund or whatever you could call them. Now, so what we do as venture capital firm, we will never take a majority position in a startup and a scale-up. We only invest in scale-ups, by the way. So never. And that is quite common. And the reason is that let's say if you talk about firms of 2-3 years old that have growth potential, you always want to have the founding team to have the majority of shares. So the founders should have more than 50% of the shares, otherwise you will ruin all the incentives for them to work. So now a bit of calculus. Let's say that you have your startup and you have your angel and you need a bit of the funding for MVP and to set things up. And the angel says, okay, I would like to have 30% of the shares for that. So, and then I invest. So, but then make the calculus. So if you want to have the next round of funding for real amounts of money, you have already given away 30% to the angel. A venture capital firm will say, well, yes, we will only fund you if the founders have 50%, and then there's only 20% left. Now, of course, if you really want to have big funding from a venture capital firm for scaling, you cannot live with giving only 20%. So that's where the value of death in funding comes from. So the first danger is that if you're approached by angels, you should not give them more than 5% of the shares. So, and then the angels really pull, but yeah, then you have to explain, look, but if you want to make big money, we need another financing route later on, and then it's a 50% for us. And so there's no room for you. But this is the first danger. That's that desperate startups that give far too much money to angels. Now, the second danger with angels funding is, so I'm not a rich person. I'm also not poor, but I'm also not rich. But I think I'm richer than 90% of the angel investors that I know, because they have no money at all. And so what often happens is that kind of story, you go to a pitching event and then there are all kinds of people there, and many of them approach you and say, well, I'm an angel investor. And then you start talking and you make an appointment, and at a certain moment, this investor will say, yeah, but you come from a technology background and you're very young and you have no experience actually in managing the company. So you need an experienced people who know finance and operational kind of things. And you say, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. I can read this in books. And then the angel tells you, yeah, maybe I can do that. So then you start to worry, okay, and then he says, yeah, but maybe if I do that, then you pay me some kind of a broad monthly salary for it. And then you say, well, okay, you start calculating, if you invest a bit, and then you say, well, if you invest a bit, let me think about it. Said, no, well, let's wait with my investment until we are in the next stage. These people are not wanting to invest in you, they want to have a job and to want to have equity for free in that sense. Or that you pay them and even they get an equity and then in the so there's a lot of people, a lot of scam out there in a sense, in this kind of that call themselves angel investors, but ultimately are just a cost to the company. Again, very black and white. So what you really should do if you're is whether check whether angel investors have actually invested money in other companies. And if you do this in, let's say, a transparent way, you may even ask, okay, so if you invested there, can I ask about what you actually done there, what they think of you? Of course, this might also be a very cultural thing, but at least invest a bit of time in due diligence of your angels and not only the other way around. So venture capital for grown-ups, only as I said, so clearly, management by venture capital firms is labor intensive in that sense. So they invest only in a few, and often you need to be a bit bigger. Clearly, if you are starting, the thing I could say is not to worry too much about venture capital because it's often way forward in your development. So there are many things to consider. I would say that if you're big enough to be approached by venture capital firms, take a good lawyer. You will probably have the money for that because you are relatively successful, but getting the term sheets and the contracts right, you can read a book about it. And I think many entrepreneurs think, oh yeah, I know so much from books and I read all these glossy things. I've been to a business school or whatever. I know this, but the economics behind it is okay, but the legal elements of venture capital contracts, you really need a lawyer from your side in that sense. So keep that. Now, I think that one of the things, so coming from Europe, there's also another concern I would have with the overemphasis on venture capital, although I am in a venture capital firm, but I'll come back to that, what we actually do. Because I think that, so there is this whole talk that there are not enough venture capital firms. There are actually angels in Europe. They're small. So how come that there still are an increasing amount of success stories in startup funding also in Europe, and whereas the presence of venture capital firms is very small compared to Silicon Valley, Boston, etc. So how come? And I think that one of the reasons, and I'll come back to that a bit later, is that we have venture capital in disguise, which is what you could call corporate venture funds. So at Unknown Group, we do projects for Shell Venture Capital. So what they do is they do energy transition, then they look at a lot of startups and sustainability and indeed energy technology. And this is not venture capital per se, but they start working with scale-ups in this and starting to fund them, which is not that different that you would see for venture capital funds. But all this, let's say, crying as a lack of venture capital or lack of angels, I think in many contexts that we see, that's actually made up by large corporates. And that is often forgotten, that they work with contracts and innovation contracts. And that is a very important source for startups. Now, a last source, a source is employees. Often in startups, you call them co-workers. look, many startups start with actually not paying employees, and that you can also see as some kind of a funding strategy. You find people who already have a job and do this next to their job. And you'll say, look, I pay you in shares or options later on these shares. All what you do is actually they start working without it costs you money. The thing is here that if you combine all these things, so non-cash payment by family, free NGOs entry, people working for you as co-workers, then you start asking, so why do I actually need money to start up in that sense, if you do this right? Of course we did, but that's a bit of like the strategy. Now banks, I would say that, and this is really different across countries, but banks don't fund startups in general. And I know this depends on the context, but I don't really know. There are all kinds of banks who make commercials that they are for young, but actually startup financing and scale-up financing is simply way too risky for banks. So they might shout a few things, but they don't actually do it. But that doesn't mean that banks are not important, but for a different reason. And the different reason is that if you get some funding and some traction in your startup, then what you need is credit facilities from banks. So you don't want to have loans so don't go for a loan. What you need to do is something slightly different, is say, look, I will have a need for working capital in the firm, in the sense is that I have to pay my suppliers before I get money in from selling the product or service. So to bridge those things is very important for liquidity. Now, that kind of funding, so the differences between your inputs and your outputs in your firm, you can that is not easy to fund with the funding from angels, venture capital, etc., etc. So that is the short-term funds, and they're very important for your liquidity, especially if you have moving around cash flows. So if you come to terms with, let's say, these startups and scale-ups, what you have to do is you go to the bank, but for a credit facility. That is important, I think. And don't forget it. So don't go negotiate for a loan. Go for it where you say, look, in general, it's the balance of zero. But if there's a month that I need 3,000 euros to match, then I make a credit facility. So I think that these are important things from liquidity perspective. In total, this is a bit of the funding thing. Let me look at the chats. There's
all is clear, Hein.
Okay.
When there is anything, I will let you know.
Okay. So,
and I'm enjoying it, by the way. You're giving a lot of good tips.
And so thanks. So before I move also a bit to our business model, what I would like to talk to you about, because you're setting up this kind of virtual thing, is about a lot of the things comes from another problem that we have in entrepreneurship, is that how do you fund actually incubation and acceleration programs? So I think that over the years, this business models for incubation programs has really changed, and I'd like to explain this a bit to you, and then it makes also clear how this is moving and how what are dominating business models here, and maybe what some of you are actually doing here. So as a bit of a joke, but so I think that if you go to the let's say the left here, I already explained that if it is difficult for angel investors to take equity positions in the startups that they're hosting, it's also difficult for incubators. So incubators, also in my university, they thought, okay, yeah, if we set up so the government, local government or university, I think if we invest in startups and we take an equity position in them, then we will be rich. But then we're already talking about also again the 20-30%, and that makes the exit very difficult. So actually that model of taking equity positions in startups in the incubator process, that has died out. It's killing the exit. So therefore, nobody wants it. And there's, by the way, also another reason is that if you're from a university like I am, also, then if you take, then people who invest in it later, they anticipate a huge mess. That they are dealing with public institutions who are all corrupt in their view. So they don't want to mess with startups coming from a public incubator. But even also for private, you have the same kind of angel thing. There was a bit of a move, and that was coming from especially also Silicon Valley, that instead of going for equity position, you would like to have revenue shares in contracts. So when startups start to make money, or we're going to exit, you get a percentage of it. The challenge often is that it simply takes too long. So I'm not saying that if you're in a very successful entrepreneurial ecosystem, it cannot be done, but in many situations, the first real revenues only come after 5-6 years. So then you're already bankrupt as a program. So that simply takes too long. Now then we have the renting of office space. Well, everybody has done that business model for incubators knows that's also hell, because simply the starters don't have the money for it. So you give it away for free, they cannot pay, they go bankrupt, etc. But they simply won't pay it. And then, you can have the business model if you're a public NGO kind of incubator, attracting even more subsidies. So you have the first subsidy and the second subsidy, but you actually are starting to make a fool of yourself, because everybody starts thinking about, you can only live with public money, and you're training private entrepreneurs. What are you doing? So this is let's say the thing. So there. Over time, there was actually an emerging business model. If you look at many of these programs, and say, well, actually, where we really make money is we sell the community. So if you think about many of the incubators, they sell the startups for programs, for example, with corporates, or they sell the program to work with cities. And that has become the dominant business model for incubation programs to funding. So you first build the community, maybe like that's what you're doing here, and then you start selling the community to work with entities who are willing to pay you as an organizer for actually doing that. So this has been emerging as a business model, and I think it is also important to understand what we are doing. So if you think about it, in Europe, this funding of innovation through corporates, so not venture capital, and selling communities of startups and scale-ups that you first organize as a community and then sell them basically for contracting with large corporates, that is something that for us is an important part of the business model. So in the what I would call conventional setting of this kind of corporate open innovation strategies, is that you have corporates who try to make an exclusive partnership with a certain startup to scale up. But what you see now is that corporates find it's too difficult in their control. So what in the modern thing is that you have a network of large corporates, and you have a network of startups, which we call venture engines. So around a certain theme or combining incubation centers, and you sell the venture engines on certain topics to multiple corporates. So this is an important part of the business model of these kind of programs. You see also why we need to do the coaching ourselves in the venture engines is that if you look at our clients, instead of looking for early stage and unproven technologies, they like to step in more viable solutions and a more later stage. So the combination between corporates, you have a lot of parties for startups for corporate, but there's no investment. So if you look at, let's say, the party side, you look at the public kind of thing. I'm also involved in that. And I get the Get in the Ring examples, often publicly funded things. But then if you move ahead in the business model, and you have the latest stage and viable solutions. That means also that lots of these companies do not go for equity participation, but what they offer is really contracts for innovation funding. So that is the thing that is and corporates do not do mentoring on an individual basis, but really also about really connect them to specific business units for scaling and implementation. So instead of mentoring the startups, they really go for the technology. There's also a danger, by the way, for business owners, because these large corporates in our later stage are more interested in your technology than in you, and to learn from you. So that is where we tap also in with a lot of the things. So think about getting the ring. So I was starting with these kind of competitions, and the basic idea is that we build the competition through Get in the Ring events. But what we do is at the backside we sell those communities to various stakeholders. So just give a few examples of let's say the traditional business model is, look, you organize a very light version of a pitching event, and you would say, well, look, you don't have to pay anything for the branding, but the only thing to have, let's say, being branded globally for your event, let's say, is that you pay the tickets to the finals. So there's one yearly final of all the, let's say, the winners of local Get in the Rings. But of course, that is where our money as a company comes from, because what we do is we have a global meetup organized, and there we set it, for example, to a city that wants to profile itself as being entrepreneurial. So that is, let's say, the starting business model, is that you have a lot of, let's say, these local events. And I think people may know the Entrepreneurial World Cup is exactly the same. Creative Business Cup, Agri-Business Cup. So here you make the loss, because this is probably also for you a loss making with respect to your own resources. The local host only pays the ticket, but not your costs of doing that. But where you make the money is in organizing the global meetup and selling this. You can also use, so you have a Get in the Ring Plus version, which is a bigger one, where you organize more yourself and already give the branding. You have plug-in events, so where you say so the market is that there's a lot of, let's say, large. So, for example, there's currently coming up Impact City event in The Hague, by the way, and they have to fill 3 days, and they market 3 days of, and then you say, well, we if you pay for a Get in the Ring, we will make sure that this evening program is set for you. So that is also a part. But it's basically you try to build the community of the startups. You have them competing. You have to assess them. You scout them and you screen them because you want to sell them on the right-hand side. And we use the Global Entrepreneurship Network for a long time to actually do that, and still do. So city marketing is that you simply say, look, we done things like in Toulouse, where they had sewage problems, all kinds of things. And we said, okay, we can bring in 20 startups from our pool here and to work with you on city marketing element that you're actually working on these kind of things. But you pay 200,000 euros for actually us managing that. Then, of course, in the Get in the Ring, then the other thing is, of course, you have to, this is pooling startups together for VCs and corporates to invest in. So this is really for them a cost saving, and you pick part of the money from that. Future music, as I called it. Okay, we have, of course, a lot of data on all these startups and scale-ups, but we've not done enough with it for the moment. So maybe if so we are investing in there is a good following system. So the connection between how do startups pitch, how successful have they been in global meetups, and how have they progressed afterwards, may tell us a bit more about the trajectories of startups and scale-ups through data analytics. But so far, this is something that we need to do in the coming years. So clearly, this is a bit like what I said. So of course, we can also play a bit rough here. So suppose these are, let's say, corporate clients for open innovation with service contracts over our competition. But interestingly, you can also have your own venture capital fund because you have a bit of a first shot in a sense. So if you know, for example, that large corporates are very interested in certain companies, you may front load them with your venture capital. Of course, you should not do this really on a criminal side, but it's basically that you know, okay, maybe we invest together, and you can get a good, let's say, return on that. So if you have this model, then there might be a big venture capital. So it's not that we set up this venture fund ourselves. We're actually bought by, at least part bought by a large venture capital firm who thought, okay, this is an opportunity to actually match the competitions to our own investments, and therefore in the funding. Also, for the people who probably are here because about, let's say, things like European funding or World Bank funding, it's difficult to get programs funded without you put money as venture capital in it yourself. So there's a lot of co-financing in public projects. So if you have this model, you might also sell it, let's say, to the European Union by saying, look, we can bring in startups and scale-ups. We can actually bring in 50% of the funding. You do the other 50%. So this organization, and the problem for a lot of, let's say, competitors is that they need, for projects to be run, they need 100% funding and cannot provide the co-funding in the investment. So if you build this system, then you can actually also connect to that a bit better by having a part of public funding in that way. So this is, let's say, the business model that we're after. And I think that going back to my first, it tries to also cater. It's not that we make only money out of it, but it also is the problems of funding startups and scale-ups. That's where I started, and they are increasingly funded through programs and incubator sessions, but are sold as communities and venture engines, and it has become the dominant way of, let's say, funding your startup by participating with your content and knowledge in these kind of collaborative things. So this is a bit my talk. I've been talking quite some time already, I see. So let me stop and let me see how you take it.
If any other question, please write it in the chat.
Yeah, you can also
major things that I really saw startups failing because of it are not having not having a good lawyer whenever they get an investor, and you tapped into that, and some people think they can do it alone, and it's not right.
Yeah, but it's also I can get I'm 90%. We already agree, but I can tell you one anecdote here, and that is different anecdote on lawyers. And maybe this is a bit populist, but my one of my former bosses said, "Well, look, I'm an economist by trade." He said, "Look, if you have sociologists, they have no friends. If you have people who have done pedagogue studies, they cannot raise their own children. Economists are bad in handling money, and lawyers are all criminals." And I think that sometimes you need also a lawyer because we are actually quite nice people as entrepreneurs. And that makes us also a bit naive. And sometimes you have to be wise and simply take the biggest asshole as a lawyer and delegate things to him or her, because you're simply not good at these kind of things. And some of these venture capitalists, they're really bad guys. So we're very nice. We're creative. We work hard and things like that. It's not our game. So better call Saul indeed. So so you need a soul for this kind of thing. So that's another side. But don't be naive that you need people like Saul. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Salim also asked a question: can startups skip investor funding by going directly to clients? I'm not sure if he wants to be funded by clients. Is this what you mean, Salim?
Yeah. So I didn't. Yeah, definitely. I think that I've not touched upon it, but you have, of course, a lot of customer-led innovation as well. So this combination that customers actually are your first endorsers of technology, and then you need their funding, especially, of course, in the business-to-business environment. This happens also a lot. And of course, there are also dangers, but in all kind of all fundings, there are dangers. So yeah, definitely you will have, especially also in business-to-business environments, this clients, I think. But what I said, like with large corporates, it's a bit the same. So you make technology solutions often for these large corporates to be included in the business unit. So that's actually quite close to this kind of setting as well, indeed. Yeah.
If anyone has a question, you may. Oh, there's a big question. Seems in the chat.
I'm reading it.
Anupam, I would like to know what are those 3-4 metrics which, let's say, a VC like Unknown Group will look at before investing in a startup at early stage or pre-seed funding stage. In addition, would like to know if Unknown Group is looking to invest in any specific segment into emerging tech.
Yeah, super good question. I think that we look at, let's say, the first thing, of course, is the very, very traditional one, which is the lifetime value experiences. So the whole bunch of lifetime experience, cost of customer acquisition, therefore conversion rates. So I think that the big thing, I think, if what you have to keep in mind, but it is all well known, you can read it in many books, is that for startups and scale-ups, it is really about the operational metrics and not the financial metrics that much. So if you want to have lifetime value or cost of customer acquisition kind of things, that is actually operational metrics that you're presenting. So if you'd have, let's say, a freemium model, how many people convert? It's not that we want to see you make this much of revenue on the premium kind of your offering. It's more how many people. So I think that in general, these are operational metrics that we are looking for, and they are quite standard of conversion rates, retention elements, and therefore, growth in customer base. These kind of things. We are not at the moment, also as from a venture, we are not investing in very early startups. Another thing is, as I would answer, is that you often hear a lot that VCs look at the quality of the entrepreneurial team. Sometimes I doubt this a bit. A lot of VCs actually tell you, "Oh, now it's all about the quality of the founder," but then then they have to show the metrics anyway. So this is a good question of focusing. So I'm not immediately going to say that. So get the metrics on the basis of the operations right, but the operation. So if you, I think that we also look at CVs in that sense. So in track record, not so much whether we like your pitch, although of course get in the ring is a pitch, but be sure that let's say the entrepreneurial CV is also present, and that is often what we look at, especially from a desk research kind of thing. So that these are important things, but I'm also going to be a bit critical. Because currently this is one of the things that I don't think that we excel in, especially in the early stage of the venture engines. So we do so, and and it's sensitive. For example, for Bayer, we did quite recently the Women Entrepreneurs event, outreach out of Africa. And then, yeah, so it was a lot of parties in a sense. But I'm not saying that we had good metrics actually to evaluate those kind of groups. So it also from our side, I think it's a bit too standard in that sense. We need to be a bit more, and that's maybe the second thing that you're asking is, okay, maybe you should look a bit more at what kind of specific segments. So we are basically energy transition and the future of foods. These are the two things that we're really big at, and that also comes from the contracts with Shell, Unilever, which are large, of course, originally Dutch, British multinationals. So, and Eni, by the way, also. So it is still. So one of the struggling things in the market is that it's still very much driven also by our customers, whereas we would like to move a bit more bottom up and redecide what is the emerging technology fields that we want to push towards these corporates. So yeah, it's a challenge. How do you balance, let's say, on the one hand, the customer direct interests, and so it's a kind of creative business and kind of thing. You become too quickly drawn to your bigger customers and not investing too much enough in it. So currently we do space entrepreneurship. So I'm working on that next week. And it's simply because we want to, so there is this kind of to build a venture engine around something that is not immediately driven by large corporates, but more like as a policy priority in Europe, for example, at the moment. So we are, it's not easy. Okay, let me...
That's very interesting, Hein. I have the last question because
there are quite a few.
Yeah, I'll read it from Ahmad. We're basically starting an entrepreneurs funds program in Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
The funds are getting up to $10 million or more, which is big for Africa. So we're contacting a bit of NGOs and trying to expand our network to a global one. What can you help me with, and what are your advices for that?
So I still have to fulfill a contract in South Sudan, but it's closed at the moment still for us to travel. So I hope that gets better. But this is probably not, this is not the let's say, I'm not saying the proper Sudan, but this is not South Sudan. Well, I think Sudan is super important currently in the African Union kind of thing. And there's, of course, a lot of, let's say, the political difficulties also with the Nile and Uganda, Egypt, and the border with Egypt and things like that. But everybody understands that, let's say, the Pan-African integration, Sudan plays a very important role with all the political challenges that it has. So I would say that one of the things is the African Union initiatives, which are quite important and probably currently chaired by Senegal, by the way, I think. But so if I give a tip, I think that this integration in which Sudan plays such an important role in making, let's say, the Horn policy is a big interest to all. So that would be a bit like where to look for. I think also that what I know, so and having worked in the region a bit, so it's the banking system in Sudan is a bit of a challenge still, and especially correspondent banking is the thing, which means, which is an indication that if you want to attract funds from, let's say, global NGOs or things, they're always looking for organizations that have it in them to lend the money in a credible, transparent way. So, so if you in a country like Sudan can establish, let's say, a credible NGO with transparent kind of, I think, so it's not only bureaucratic. I'm not saying how to do that, but probably maybe also team up with organizations from outside of Sudan. Then there is a big, let's say, opportunity if you can lend them on. So I've been also working, you know, this of course in Iraq. It was a bit like the same thing. So after this, there were billions of dollars over Iraq, but they could not be spent because there were no organizations who could report this. So invest a lot in your incredible reporting with on these programs, and then you'll be, let's say, a monopolist in lending the in lending the money in Sudan a bit. So I think that these would be my advices. Also very basic, of course, but it's also a very big question, of course.
Hein, we promise to finish on time usually, so I'm gonna give you like the final sentence advice for every aspiring entrepreneur or someone who's raising funds.
Yeah, so I also see Salim's last question here, which is actually very much me, because I've been working with refugee Syrian entrepreneurs in the Netherlands a lot with a big project called Plan Einstein. Now, there is a sensitive thing. A sensitive thing is coming up. What about return entrepreneurship? And
nice.
And you can have different perspectives on this. One thing is that as there are people who have status, Dutch passports, and things like that, and they want to return because now their children are safe. That's basically, if I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who from Syria and the Netherlands, as soon as their children are safe, they want to take a risk. I'm not saying they go back to Baghdad or things like that, but they can go back to the region and things like that. So we have to make sure that that we prepare them and give the opportunities and support them well if they want to do this. Because, yeah, to be honest, there are a lot of high-skilled, very talented people under the refugees coming, but they are underemployed in the Netherlands and Germany. So yeah, as soon as they're safe and their children are safe, I can imagine, and we as societies, we should provide them ample opportunities to do so. And so this is something, so if you talk about entrepreneurs, startups in Syria, in that sense, in general already, yes, but especially also people who might find it in Kurdistan, for example. I have two friends who returned to Kurdistan. And now Kurdistan is not Syria, I know it's not Iraq in that sense, but there were refugees from Iraq there, yes, who have returned and are supported in these kind of returns. So I really, it's not for all, but I think that the more we can do on that, the better in a sense, and this kind of and give them with it. So that's maybe my last wish. It's not so much a remark as a wish.
By the way, I will add one thing that you don't know about Hein.
Yeah.
When I first asked Hein, I want you to be speaker at the Ace of Ventures. So he filled a form, and the topic was refugee entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I thought.
Then I told him, Hein, we prefer to make it a workshop, not an interview.
That was fine. Yeah, it was a quick
and
shot.
He said, okay, funding the startup.
No, I thought that was really, at the moment, it's really one of my main things that I'm doing, to make that happen in the Netherlands, because Belgium has got already quite a good program on it. Also financial support to connect to NGOs, but in the Netherlands we don't have, and not many countries have. So this kind of support mechanism we should really build. And so I hope that
Salim's question ignited your topic actually, and I love that. And I want to also highlight one thing. When we were at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, Hein actually organized a meetup to support our friend from Ukraine and support the entrepreneurs in Ukraine. It was a very, very, very interesting topic.
You were my bodyguard.
And interesting engagement. And yes, I was Hein's bodyguard, because in Saudi Arabia I speak Arabic, and I was managing the
behind the scenes, yeah,
behind the scenes,
and making sure that I did
really,
not go too far, because we were actually in a bit of a danger. So yeah.
I really want to thank you for everything,
Okay.
not only today, your intervention, for everything you're doing in your community and for everyone's community. I know how much you support entrepreneurs, also refugees. And I love the word that you mentioned earlier, return entrepreneurship. Wow, wow, I love it. Maybe this is a topic for a panel later on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Yeah,
spirit.
and thank you
and
for listening, and very happy to to also to connect to you as a community. Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.